legal immigrants to allow so many illegals come in, take jobs, do things, and when illegals come in and do this, they're hurting the job market for domestic workers, but they're hurting the job market for legal immigrants.
You're listening to Faith in Action. I'm your host, Matthew Nowlin.
And I'm Shawn Graham.
We lead Conservative Christians of Tennessee, and we are thankful you're listening to the show. Conservative Christians of Tennessee exists to analyze political policy and politicians in Tennessee, and all from a conservative Christian worldview. We want to glorify God by helping you to glorify God, so please don't hesitate. Send us any questions or comments via email. You can reach me directly by emailing matthew@tnchristian.com, or on X, I'm at MNBookman. Our scripture for today is Deuteronomy 32nd chapter, verse 8. When the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. God designed nations as one means of showing his glory. As the creator of all, God also created the nations. Scripture teaches that he drew up the very boundaries that so many people have been violating in our nation. Again, Deuteronomy 32:8 says that he divided to the nations their inheritance, and he separated the sons of Adam. We further see in Revelation 7, verses 9 through 10, that the nations are apparently preserved through time and arrayed before the throne of God at the end of days. Quote, "After this I beheld, and lo, a great multitude, which no man could number, of all nations and kindreds, people and tongues, stood before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes and palms in their hands, and cried with a loud voice, saying, Salvation to our God, which sitteth upon the throne, and unto the Lamb." One of the best ways nations can glorify God is taking care of their citizens, their own people. Romans 13 teaches that rulers do this by being a terror to evil doers, but our uncontrolled borders have done the opposite of that. Instead of being a terror to evil, it's allowed a terror to the citizenry. We've allowed over these borders much evil, including criminals, since every illegal alien is a criminal, slave trafficking, which we weirdly call human trafficking, fentanyl and other drugs, sophisticated ultra-violent gangs, financial crimes and capital theft, and even foreign intelligence operatives. And I will tell you that is the best case scenario, that they are merely intelligence operatives. We've seen law enforcement and public safety strained. Educational resources have been maxed out. One example to this just being the burden rural counties in Tennessee face, having to come up with ridiculous numbers of interpreters for non-citizen students. Social and financial implications of this have been tremendous and will continue to be tremendous. We've stepped over the Good Samaritan right in front of us, our neighbors, to seek Good Samaritan all over the earth. And sadly, in this process, much trust in the church has been eroded, since many churches and denominations around the state of Tennessee have actively encouraged illegal immigration. In fact, the Presbyterian Church in America even published an article instructing illegals on how to avoid ICE, which they took down after strong and immediate backlash. When this show started airing in 2019, one of our first commentaries was a heavy criticism of Governor Bill Lee's actions related to refugee resettlement. We were right on this issue, but for years, our state legislature has failed to work to make Tennessee safe for citizens by making it unwelcoming to illegal aliens. In fact, the state of Tennessee even went so far as to pass legislation, Republican supermajority, allowing illegals to obtain professional licenses in Tennessee. We were critical of the recent special session overall, but we did see one positive aspect of that related to immigration. In the spirit of that, we at Conservative Christians of Tennessee call on counties across the state of Tennessee to partner with the Trump administration through the ICE 287G program, which every Republican president this century has used and which every Democrat president has shelved. These partnerships through the ICE 287G program activate local law enforcement to act on behalf of ICE, ensuring that criminal threats are not only taken out of our communities, but eventually deported out of our nation. And this program even allows federal money to come to these agencies as they fight illegal immigration. For example, Knox County's jail used to make a decent amount of money housing illegal aliens under the ICE 287G program. If your elected sheriff or your city aren't involved in the ICE 287G program, call the leadership there and encourage them to do so. Your sheriff in Tennessee is elected in your county. Call them and remind them of the old opportunities made new under President Trump and United States Border Czar Tom Homan. If the ICE 287G program rolls across at a county level across this state, we can make it safe for citizens again. Alan Atchison, our guest today, is a longtime friend of the show and a Southern Baptist living in the suburbs of Birmingham, Alabama. He earned a Master of Arts in Interdisciplinary Studies and Political Science from Western New Mexico University, and Alan studied church history at Liberty Baptist Theological Seminary. He holds a BA in Political Science from the University of Alabama at Birmingham and is married to Paige. They have one son. Alan, welcome back to Faith in Action.
Thanks for having me back. It's been, I think, a momentous bit of time since the last time we talked, and I think there's a lot of history happening right now around us.
It is. And the last time we did talk, Alan, we talked about immigration and really loving our neighbors for real, like actually loving our neighbors. When you were on the show last, we discussed the significant cost savings of helping refugees and people in need at a point very close to their home nation, as well as the benefits that offers in simply allowing refugees to return to their nations to help rebuild them. Can you give our listeners a recap of that?
I do think that we talked last time that if you want to help, particularly refugees, bringing them past 15 countries to the U.S. is not necessarily the best way to do it. There's the cultural issues and there are a host of things. So I think what we have seen is that if you really want to make a difference, you can try to make a difference as close to their home as possible. And if they're a refugee, they're supposed to be going to the nearest kind of safe port and trying to get asylum there. Of course, we know that a lot of people are really using this system to come and find jobs and do work and live in the United States. And that's fine, but there are appropriate ways to do that. So I think the best way to help people is to try to keep them where they are. That means that U.S. policy ought to be, in terms of things in the Western Hemisphere, promoting stability and wealth creation in Latin American
Mhm.
states. And unfortunately, for a long time, we haven't been doing that. We've been promoting the exact wrong policies when the Biden administration was in charge. So I think that's beginning to change. But I think last time our point was that a lot of these Latin American states actually need workers. They need people. And trying to increase and improve the infrastructure there would be a benefit.
As you talked, I realized that we have effectively abandoned the Monroe Doctrine. The fact that China has been able to come into so many of these nations using almost an Incan imperialistic model. And what I mean by that is the Belt Road gives to get. It gives to get influence. It gives to create need. It gives to create dependence. When did we abandon the Monroe Doctrine? The doctrine that said that the Western Hemisphere is to be controlled by residents of the Western Hemisphere.
I think it began changing after World War One and certainly after World War II, where we saw policies go from the good. They wanted to be I think FDR was the good neighbor policy, that you don't want to be this imperial power dictating to everyone what needs to be. However, there were times that the Monroe Doctrine did make a comeback, certainly during both Eisenhower, even to an extent the Kennedy administration, and certainly the Nixon administration tried to fight to keep communist-led governments as restricted as possible in the Western Hemisphere. We see that in flux, and certainly China is the greatest geopolitical threat we faced, probably in the nation's history. So
Mhm.
it is troubling that for the last 20 years, the deep state has been basically on the China payroll. I think that is one of the main reasons that we have such a difficult time confronting China because so many people want the status quo to continue. But at some
Mhm.
point, they are going to use the power they are amassing. It's only a matter of time.
Right.
And as long as we let them have control of key areas like canals or other things, we're going to be in a very difficult strategic position. You made a point. It's happening here in the Western Hemisphere, and
Mhm.
we're trying to contain China within the first island chain in the Pacific. So if
Right.
we can't do it here, what makes us think we're going to even have any success there? So,
Yeah.
yeah, we have to get serious about how we interact with these states. And I think the Trump administration has done a very good job. It showed that both Mexico folded, Canada basically folded, and Panama too, in some of his pressures. It just takes a little bit of willingness to be a leader and also a little bit of willingness to take heat from the woke media. So I think we are finally on the right track. And hopefully, on this topic here, we'll get Elbridge Colby approved
Mhm. Yeah.
Undersecretary for Defense Policy. That will be a great addition.
Mhm.
Someone who has written a book on containing and trying to avoid war with China by being very strong. And
Right.
I don't think he would like use the term containment, but yeah,
Right.
for those of us who
Yeah.
think back to the Cold War,
Yeah.
in a sense, that is what the U.S. is trying to do. They're trying to build a bulwark around China so it doesn't exploit its neighbors anymore. than it
Right.
already is. So
Alan, with illegal immigrants coming into the United States, and then the Chinese doing all these infrastructure projects in Latin and South America, folks come to the U.S., they learn a skill somewhat, in construction. Does Chinese involvement in Latin America destabilize both their nations and us by making them less needed in their home countries and offering fewer opportunities for them to return to?
I think China has mostly been trying to buy access and
Hmm.
leverage money and building projects to not only
Hmm.
employ their citizens because they send, experts and they send construction companies and all this. So they have a benefit
Hmm.
of that money that they're giving or loaning comes back into Chinese jobs. Sometimes China has destabilized places. I
Hmm.
think
Hmm.
certainly Afghanistan, probably starting in the 2017, 2018 range, they
Right.
started working more and more against U.S. interests there. It's almost
Right.
on a case by case basis with China.
Sure.
Yeah. Hey,
Sure.
Alan, the contrast that you've pointed out here, there's a clear contrast between the previous administration and what Trump's doing. It's just a vast difference on day one. Can you summarize
Voters are.
where are we with immigration in the Trump administration? Is it going to require congressional oversight or not?
I don't think it's going to. And just yesterday, the White House put out an update that apprehensions along the southwestern border plummeted in January. There was a 36% decline from the previous month of December, the lowest apprehensions along the border since May of 2020. This is phenomenal, and
Yeah.
it's headed in the right direction. In fact, this is also in the White House press release. It quotes ABC News of all people, but it says from January 21 through January 31, the number of U.S. Border Patrol apprehensions dropped 85% compared to the same period in 2024. That's a 93% decline of migrants apprehended at ports of entry as well. So things are headed in the right direction, and all it took was a willingness to enforce the law. And that's one of the things that I think is so instructive. These people who cry about the rule of law and cry about all of this stuff really don't care about that, because if they did, they would want the immigration laws enforced too. They don't. Russell Moore, for example, I think he wrote last week or something that Jesus was a refugee and illegal immigrant. Now, I've written about that
Hmm.
um,
Yes.
multiple times. It's a misuse of terms. It's wrong. It wouldn't fit. In fact, he wasn't a refugee because he wasn't leaving his country. He was a subject of Rome and he was moving within the borders. Yesterday was the first time I heard it explained a different way, but there was an article in Providence from a political science professor who said, this is more like an internally displaced person. That's a completely different segment of an international law than a refugee. So these terms are misapplied to abuse Christians
Yeah.
into accepting what are illegal and immoral policies for the most part.
Yeah, there's bystepping, or rather sidestepping, the actual legal definitions of these terms and the
Yeah.
traditional historic norms in which these terms were used, and they are cutting straight to the empathy juggernaut. It's an emotional manipulation tactic, and I think you hit right on that. So Shawn and I believe that Christians should 100% support deportations. It's a Romans 13 issue. It's a recognition of the verse from earlier, Deuteronomy 32:8, when the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance. When he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people. So there are people outside the bounds that the governments that God has put in place recognize, and we believe they don't even necessarily set them. They're set by God himself. We've been calling for mass deportations at Conservative Christians of Tennessee for a long time. We talked about Eisenhower's Operation Wetback, which is the largest deportation operation in the history of the United States. And in fact, Shawn banned me from saying Operation Wetback on the radio for so long. He said people are not ready
They
to
weren't.
hear that. Largest deportation operation in American history. We looked for candidates that would support them. There was nobody that would go out. But are we correct? Should Christians, as people who claim to be Christians and claim to be operating from a Christian theological position, support mass deportations?
I don't think there's anything from a Christian perspective that would make me more inclined to one side or the other in terms of the right immigration policy. I think the Bible is very specific in certain areas and does not address other things because I don't think it was part of the scope and the intention of the original authors to give us immigration policy advice
Right.
from, antiquity to 21st century liberal America. So I think there are things that Christians should support: the rule of law, the fairness.
Mhm.
It's patently unfair to legal immigrants to allow so many illegals come in, take jobs,
Yes.
do things, and when illegals come in and do this, they're hurting the job market for domestic workers, but they're hurting the job market for legal immigrants.
That's right.
So there has to be some recognition that the policy should be at heart fair. Nothing that's happened from the Biden administration was fair. It was designed to import a group of people that they thought, erroneously, it turns out, would be willing to support Democrats all the time. Well,
Mhm.
Trump built a multiracial coalition on issues that matter to people. People are, regardless of ethnicity and race, they want America to be successful. They want it to be
Yes.
safe. They want the opportunity that capitalism, that's why they came. They don't want the nanny state. Now, most don't, but
Mhm.
they want the opportunity to achieve. And as
Mhm.
long as we have unfair policy, how are they going to do that? So when we talk
Right.
about the rough outlines of what a Christian should support, I think those are things that we should look at. You want to apply the law because that lets everyone have a fair playing field. If we know what the law is and it's enforced, that's a good thing. And then fairness, I think beyond that, it's not a bad thing for a government to protect its people.
That's
The
right.
fundamental requirement
Mhm.
for government,
Right.
Yes.
it
Al-
exists to protect its people.
Alan, I
And
was
Right.
just talking to a police officer about that. And he's worked with the ATF and the FBI. And I asked him, do more of these laws make it harder or easier for you to do your job? And he said it makes it better for everyone if we follow these laws. And this is a law enforcement officer who's trying to say, I need more help to make it better for everybody. Because when we don't enforce the laws, it makes it hard for the immigrants, easier for criminals to be allowed to live on the lam. And he was just so clear. He said, the overdoses I've seen, the abuses I've seen, the crimes I've seen, this helps remove all of that for everybody. No one should have to be in a lawless land. And that kind of breaks your heart when you hear that. It's like, if you really want these immigrants to be taken care of, why are you bringing them here to some kind of hellscape where they're going to be abused, robbed, or die on the street of overdoses because of the traffic? That is the loving of the neighbor that we're forgetting. The law is a pedagogical thing, and it teaches how to better treat our neighbors, and we have to use that.
I think we forget a lot of times that we need to focus on making sure policies benefit the people. And in our case, are constituted by the people for the benefit of the people. It seems that bureaucrats have forgotten that. That's
That's
one of
right.
the reasons that it's exciting to see what the Trump administration is doing with DOGE. They're applying normal standards of review that gets applied to everything else, whether it's private business or charities or whatever. Why can't it be applied to the government? Well, we're seeing it, and we're seeing things like with the Social Security stuff. These 300-plus-year-old person, that's absurd. Either they're using that to fund some top secret thing, or there's something fishy going on with the budget. It remains to be seen. I mean, the government may have
Yeah.
legitimate reasons to hide certain programs in line items. It's been that way since the Cold War. We don't want somebody to know we have a spy plane, so we'll put it somewhere. It happens. And sometimes it really is in national interest to do that. But it almost seems like the deep state has been running the government for itself for the last 25 plus years,
Right.
probably
Yes.
since the Clinton administration. And it hasn't seemed to change. Doesn't matter who's in office. So I think now we're beginning to see some interesting things with the Trump administration.
Yeah.
And it's exciting because it's way past time.
I have an idea, and it has to
Okay.
do with remigration. All right. We have so many parachurch organizations that are tooled up and find themselves suddenly broke. The government's not going to give them any more money, hopefully not for a very long while. But I bet that Christians, in an effort to make remigration preferential over deportation and to make remigration easier than deportation, I bet Christians would give generously to make it easier for people to return to their home countries before a grab team gets them and sticks them in chains and sticks them on a plane. What do you think?
I think one of the things you are seeing with the Trump policy is that some people are going to self-deport. They're going to
Mhm.
say, I don't want the hassle. I don't want this. I can't have the job or whatever I had before. I'm just going to go back home. So you want to encourage people who want to do those things. And I think you can give some people incentives. Those who do these types of remigrations, maybe they get some advantages and some quicker review if they
Yeah.
want to come in legally. There are a lot of things we could do, but I think it's an intriguing possibility. Hard to predict how people will give, but I think there would be a lot of people that would be willing to give it a try.
When people face these, I mean, we don't have capital flight laws in this country. There are some countries where if you flee with your money, it's a capital offense. I'm not crazy. Those laws are still on the books in some Asian countries, aren't they?
Some countries that have capital controls that prevent someone from coming in and then sending money overseas. I think that one of the things that would be most effective would be some sort of remittance tax. If
Hmm.
you set up and got the government a share of money that's being sent, you're
Hmm.
going to discourage some of this and also help maybe balance the budget because there's a lot of money that gets put into the economy that's given to
Right.
illegals that's paid with
Yeah.
cash and somehow never gets taxed. So when they take it to, say, Western Union to send it to South America or wherever, maybe the government should get a portion of that. And that portion can be used to help with immigration enforcement or balancing the
Yeah.
budget because we have this enormous deficit that's going to make the U.S. no longer a superpower unless we come to terms with it. We are paying more on debt service now than defense. And a scholar I read said that in his rule is that that means you'll no longer be a great power in a
Yeah.
certain amount of time. We're headed on that trajectory. We
Oh,
have
yeah.
to get it
Yeah.
fixed. And I think the Trump administration is committed to trying as many ways as possible.
It's interesting, the remittance tax. We have supported that for a number of years. Representative Bruce Griffey was basically run out of the House of Representatives by our current Speaker, Cameron Sexton, over this and a few other issues. But Bruce Griffey in the House and Senator Mark Pody in the Senate, HB 1706, SB 2075, back in 2020, these guys proposed a remittance tax out of the state of Tennessee. Conservative Christians of Tennessee supported it, and instead the General Assembly decided that within a couple of years they were just going to go ahead and make it possible for illegal aliens to get professional licenses in Tennessee instead. But now we've had a good special session. Shawn, what happened in the special session related to immigration?
There is an immigration component in there, and I feel like at a state level now, we've got a decent policy on the books that if we are really going to have a federal policy under the Trump administration that is active and actively policing this, I think it helps us to have a Tennessee state operation that's on the code that says we're going to do that as well and support that. So I think it's like a dual prong attack. I think the state can say, if the feds aren't doing it now, we've got the legal authority to take care of that. And in a Biden type administration, you've got that insurance plan now. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of details to it that, the devil's in the details and how these bills are executed. But I think it's going to work well if the Trump administration continues on the vector that I think they're on.
I like the idea of state and federal government being able to work together and have policies that are in harmony. But ultimately, this is, I think, one of the things that's kind of frustrating. You've talked about having pushed the remittance tax in the past and run into opposition. And I think that that is always going to be the hardest thing because at some point, even with the Trump administration, there's going to be a push that, well, we need more immigration. And look, stepping aside from all the talk of theology and morality, at some point, they're not wrong because we're not having enough babies. We are not
Right.
as bad as Europe, but we need the growth that immigration provides if we want to stay a robust, dynamic economy and superpower. So we have to find ways to balance all of these interests, and we've not done a very good job of it. That's the reason I like Trump's rhetoric about, we want to build a wall, we want to have a big door in it. That fits the American way. We want to make sure that the people we let in are safe, they share our values. And that's been one of
Mhm.
the biggest problems. We've not been making sure that people who come here are committed to, the defense of life, liberty, and property. And that is a huge problem that I think and hope that with state and feds working together that maybe we can begin to
Yeah.
repair. And it's not always going to be some of the people coming in from Latin American countries that are a problem. In fact, you have for a long time, you mentioned the Eisenhower crackdown on illegal immigrants. Well, the reason that there was a problem there was because of the number of people that had come in after World War II and the policies that had been in place because we needed the labor. I think that situations change, and when that changed, Eisenhower and others modified their approach.
Alan, tell our listeners where they can go to hear more from you.
I write most of the time at capstonereport.com, so you can check it out there. I appreciate you guys having me.
Folks, that's going to do it for another episode of Faith in Action. We're thrilled that we get to join you in Nashville, Memphis, Clarksville, all over Tennessee as we talk about more ways to put your faith into action. And if you want to hear more on this or other topics from a Christian worldview, head on over to botradionetwork.com and search for Faith in Action. There we have links to 5 years of past shows, and you can listen to a wide range of guests sharing their wisdom about current events that affect Tennessee and the nation. And until next week, remember our favorite promise from the book of Exodus, the 15th chapter, the Lord shall reign forever and ever.